honourable member, and I call the member.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Firstly, I want to thank my colleague, the member for Newcastle, for bringing this motion before the House today to acknowledge the International Day of the Girl Child, which will be celebrated across the globe tomorrow. The International Day of the Girl Child was launched in 2012 in response to a widespread youth advocacy demanding acknowledgement of the unequal experience of disadvantage borne by girls across the globe. The United Nations responded to this campaign by establishing the International Day of the Girl Child, which is celebrated annually on the 11th of October. The mission statement for the annual celebration is to, and I quote, "to help galvanise worldwide enthusiasm for goals to better girls' lives, providing an opportunity for them to show leadership and reach their full potential." Quote unquote. Deputy Speaker, it's very unfortunate that here in the 21st century we need a day to highlight that globally women and girls continue to bear the greatest burden in society. In poverty, violence, disadvantage and access to education and services, girls are always the greatest affected and the greatest to suffer. This reality should be an outrage to us all. And despite a century's worth of women's activism and the suffragette movement, girls still experience discrimination and disadvantage based on their gender. Most alarming is the issues around violence, forced marriage, poverty and access to education and to opportunity, which exist globally and are rife in a number of developing countries. However, they are also present in the developed world and including Australia. One of the most damaging sources of discrimination and disadvantage faced by girls is that of access to education. Currently, there are more than 60 million girls around the world who are not in school. Removing barriers to education is vitally important due to the positive flow-on effects experienced by a girl once she's educated, but also because education is a right for every human being regardless of their gender. Deputy Speaker, the evidence shows that educated women are generally healthier and they are less vulnerable to diseases, including HIV and AIDS. They are more likely to be employed and earn better incomes. They are likely to marry later and have fewer children and are better able to provide health care and education for their children and for their families. All these factors create a better life for girls, but also for their families, and they provide for the advancement of the communities and the generations and future generations. Now, another great source of concern, Deputy Speaker, for girls is one that often prohibits girls from receiving an education, and that is the issue of forced marriage and becoming child brides. Over 100 million girls are predicted to become child brides over the next decade, with evidence suggesting that 1/3 of girls in the developing world are married before the age of 18, and 1/3 of women in the developing world will give birth before the age of 20. But it's not just in the developing world where incidences of child brides and forced marriages occur. It's also happening here, Deputy Speaker, in our country, in Australia. In 2013, the Australian Parliament criminalised forced marriage, but to date there have been no prosecutions. However, many cases of forced marriage have since come to light. In the past 2 years, the Child Welfare Hotline has received more than 70 calls relating to child brides, and in the past financial year, the Australian Federal Police has investigated 69 incidences of forced marriage, more than double from the previous year. With the rise in incidences of forced marriages, I was pleased, Deputy Speaker, to participate in a theatre workshop at a school in my electorate of Roxburgh Park College that addressed these issues. The workshop, which took place last year, was conceptualised by Ms Thoiba Saeed, who was an intern in my office, and formed part of the forced marriage pilot project run by the Australian Catholic Religious Against Trafficking in Humans. Issues relating to cultural identity, gender equality and the competing demands of family expectations with individual rights was raised during the workshop. I represent, Deputy Speaker, a very diverse migrant community with newly arrived and emerging communities from Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, making my electorate an appropriate place for such a pilot program to have taken place. I was very pleased to work with the Australian Catholic Religious Against Trafficking in Humans Order. I work with them often and have been doing so over the years. I was pleased that they were able to come into my electorate and conduct this workshop at a secondary school which is very diverse. I found the experience, the one-day experience, to be very rewarding, not just for us who are involved in conceptualising the workshop, but also by the students who participated in it, as the actual workshop allowed them to confront and to come to terms with some of the issues that many of them were actually experiencing at home. And often it's fear embarrassment and not wanting to get their parents into trouble. This is one of the reasons why these issues are not raised and why so many young women perhaps are forced into marriage.